All right, well, welcome everyone. I'm Mary Margaret White, CEO at Mississippi Today, and we're so glad to have you all here joining us for today's conversation. The idea behind this event is to give our readers the opportunity to listen to Mississippi author and preeminent writer on race, Kiese Laymon. Last week, we published a letter from our editors and explained our newsroom's plan for opening a wider conversation about race in Mississippi, one that goes beyond the who, what, when, where, and how of traditional journalism and really takes us into a bigger conversation. Kiese generously shared with us his voice and his personal experience with an essay called The Front Row. Today, Mississippi Today managing editor Kayleigh Skinner will delve into Kiese's creative process in crafting this essay, as well as his many other writings and works on race. So on behalf of the Mississippi Today team and our board of directors, I'd like to thank you, our readers of Mississippi Today, for reading the site, listening to the podcast, engaging with us on social media, joining us on text messaging, and through virtual forums like this. We truly do, honestly miss gathering with our readers, but we're grateful for this opportunity to meet with you virtually and convene on conversations like this one today. These conversations, we really believe, can help change the trajectory of our state, and that is the root of our mission at Mississippi Today. Our nonprofit newsroom is powered by the generosity of readers like you who support our newsroom with monthly or annual donations. So if you're a Mississippi Today member, thank you. You're the reason we can do these things today. And if you're not, I just encourage you to listen today, think about the value this conversation brings to your perspective, your experience, and think about a donation at the end of our program. I'm going to introduce my colleague, Kayleigh Skinner, managing editor at Mississippi Today. Kayleigh is a longtime Mississippi Today reporter. She cut her teeth in the Capitol as our lead education reporter, where she produced in-depth stories on politics, policy, and the real life impacts of K through 12 education in Mississippi. It's my pleasure to work alongside Kayleigh as she helps lead our newsroom and set our new editorial vision. So thank you, Kayleigh. Thank you, Kiese. So glad to have you both here.
Well, thanks, Mary Margaret. I want to also thank everyone who's here. I wish that we could be doing this in person, but such is 2020. To tell you more about today's event, we're calling it Mississippi Writers on Mississippi Politics. And our guest today, as Mary Margaret said, is Kiese Laymon. Kiese, you just mentioned, if you were on here before the event technically started, he's a Jackson native and the Hubert McAlexander Chair of English at the University of Mississippi. And if you haven't read any of his work, I highly recommend it. He's the author of 3 books, including the soon-to-be reissued How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others in America, which I think is coming out next month. Is that right, Kiese?
Yeah, that's right. Thanks.
Awesome. And so before we get into today's conversation, I just wanted to say that I have a few questions for Kiese myself, but at the end, I do want to leave space for anyone who's watching to ask questions. So, if you're watching this and something pops up, just type it in the chat and I will be monitoring that later. So with that, let's dive right in. Kiese, obviously we have an election coming up pretty soon on November 3rd. And last week you wrote an essay for us, as Mary Margaret said, called The Front Row. And it was about Senator Cindy HydeSmith, who's running for re-election. And I wanted to read a couple of sentences that you wrote in that. You wrote, "We cannot love Mississippi and accept Cindy HydeSmith as a senator of the blackest, most abundant state in this nation. We do not have to be this way." And I'm wondering, for people who read the essay, or maybe they haven't, what did you mean by that?
Yeah, thank you, Kayleigh, for having me. I think just at the root, what I meant is that there's certain things that should disqualify you from representing a state. And I think if your state happens to be, the blackest state in the union with questionably the most sort of concentrated commitment to civil rights or direct action, if that is the state that one lives in, you should necessarily be disqualified if you, one, I think have the politics Sidney HydeSmith has, but before the piece, I needed to use a rhetorical device. But if you literally say, I want to be on the front row of a hanging, in which the type of person that you happen to be would never be the person hanged. There has not ever been the person hanged. I just think that there's certain things that should disqualify you. And I take that personally, you know what I mean? Like there's certain things that I've done in my life that should disqualify me from seeking particular kinds of offices. You know what I'm trying to say? And I mean, that's a deeper dive, but I just think sometimes you do things that should disqualify you, and that should be disqualifying. And the fact that it's not disqualifying and actually like was a rally call is just something I think Mississippi has to deal with. We have to deal with, and we do, but we have to perpetually deal with it.
Right. And so, I mean, the context about that, which you kind of mentioned already, but if you hadn't read the essay, he's mentioning a quote that Senator Cindy HydeSmith said, where she said, if he invited me to a public hanging, I'd be on the front row. And so I think most people, we got feedback from your essay, but some people did not agree with it. And I guess the argument there is like, she said that so long ago, like, why are we bringing this up now? Why are we bringing this up now, Kiese?
You know,
Why does it still matter 2 years later?
Why does it matter? I mean, you know, the people who say she said it so long ago, I guarantee you they can remember the most brutalizing slight that happened to them, not just 2 years ago, but 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. So if it sounds like so long ago that a woman who's a senator in Mississippi said, if he invited me to a public hanging, I'd be on the front row, I just think that says a lot about your subject position. Had she said that shit 20 years ago, was still running for office now, it would feel now. So you know, you can't shift the insides of someone who feels like there's like a time limit on that kind of speech act, because there should not be. If I said that, and again, I'm on a different subject position, there should never be a time limit. Do you know what I'm saying? Mississippi is one of, you know, I think we go back and forth between 48, 49, and 50th, the poorest state in the union, right? When I was born in Mississippi, I too was poor. I was born to poor parents, grandmother who worked the chicken plant, did not have any money. I have some money now. If I sat up here on this with you and I started saying some shit that degraded poor people of all races, I feel like I am disqualifying myself from future runs for Senate. You know what I'm saying? We all just have different sort of like, I guess, moral compasses. I can't sit up here as someone who now has access to money and diss poor people who don't have access to money and be like, oh, it's because they're fault, you know, if they'd work harder. No, that's bullshit. The minute I say something like that, I should be disqualified from representing my state unless I do the hard work of talking about how I came to that, why I came to that, why it is harmful, not why it feels harmful, why it is intended to harm. And Sydney HydeSmith does not have the wherewithal to do that sort of reckoning. So in my mind, I just think she should be disqualified because of what she said about primarily Black folks in this nation, and really what she said about white women in this nation and in this and in our state who have not ever been publicly hanged. So you're going to be in the front row of a public hanging, of course, because you never would get hanged, Sydney HydeSmith. No matter what you fucking do, you would never get hung. You would never be hanged. So that's my opinion. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think 2 years is a long time ago. I just don't. I mean, I guess I'm older too, but 2 years, I can tell you a lot of bad things I did 2 years ago that would disqualify me from something. And I can tell you a lot of things harmful things other people did 2 years ago. But you know, it's where we live in this nation, right? Like, I think people forget. We watched Donald Trump the other night, and we watched the vice presidential debate, and there was not even a question about his foray into politics, which was birtherism, right? He jumped into presidential conversation by saying absolute lies about that should be really like picked through about Obama, you know what I'm saying? Really insinuating he was a terrorist, he was a Muslim, he didn't graduate high school, he didn't graduate college. That's how he came on the political scene. And ultimately, that's partially why he got elected. Now, somebody would be like, oh, that was 4 years ago. Yeah, it was only 4 years ago. And we ain't talking about it. So time to me is just different, I guess. Do you know what I'm trying to say? I need to be, and when I mess up in people's lives and I do things that are harmful to ideals or to ideas or to actual people, as much as I don't want to admit it, that person has the right to kick my ass into perpetuity. Like, I need to be held accountable until they decide I'm no longer held accountable. This woman was not held accountable for that. Me writing my little shit is not holding her accountable. Her getting on TV and saying, well, I meant something else is not being accountable. So I didn't think I was going to get so into that question, but.
Well, to kind of on the same note, I mean, we also wrote an editor's note before your essay posted that just explained like why we were doing this, because, you know, Mississippi Today is a news organization and we've never had like opinion on our site, but
Right.
Adam Ganeshow and I, the editor-in-chief, thought a lot about how it seems like 2020 race has become something we just cannot avoid talking about in Mississippi, but also nationally. I mean, you even mentioned just a moment ago how President Trump was using racist rhetoric. And so our idea behind this was to start a conversation and give a platform to Mississippians to start talking about this stuff. And we got a lot of good feedback, but we also got a lot of feedback from people that were saying that we were, quote, stirring the pot or making things about race when not everything is about race. And that made me think of you, Kiese, because you write a lot about race. And I'm wondering what your response is or your immediate reaction is when you write something like the essay you wrote for us and people say, why do you have to make this about race?
I mean, I really respect you, so I'm not going to respond to that the way I would respond to somebody who I don't respect. But what I will say is I've yet to read the critique that somebody's always making it about money. You know, somebody's always making it about the environment. Someone is always making it about power. You know what I mean? Like, so like, you know, there are people out there who only write about art. Those people are never critiqued. And the thing about that and the race is different than all of that shit, because race and racial lenses and gendered lenses like intersect every single thing. Now, if you take a strand out of what I do and only look at the race aspect, okay, you can do that and read. But, you know, you could as easily say about that piece I wrote about Sidney HydeSmith that, you know, if you're an artful like reader, that piece is about repetition. Do you know what I'm saying? As an author, that piece is about like repetition. Like what happens when like this sentence continually repeats through, I'm not trying to get too artsy, but this is what I was thinking, continually repeats throughout the piece. And then by the end, we've read this one sentence more than we read any other sentence. And the sentence subtextually is about race, but the sentence is a directive, right? It's saying like, this is what, to me, that sentence is, that piece is about pleasure. Unprovoked, Sidney HydeSmith sits on a public stage and says, this is what brings me pleasure. Now, I didn't make that shit about like public hanging and evoke lynching. I didn't do it. She did it. But all I did was repeat the word. So I don't know. I just think I think it's interesting when people are often like, this is about race. This is about race. I'm like, okay, yeah, like racial lens is one of the lenses that I write through. And I'm sort of a much more interesting writer than that. Do you know what I mean? Like, why does the repetition of this sway some people, make some people be like, what the fuck are we doing having this person lead us? And why does it make other people be like, it was so long ago, and why are we still bringing up race? Because I guarantee you, like, I think the anachronistic like treatment of Black folks in our state, historically, those of us who bore the brunt of it through our great grandparents and grandparents and parents, we wish we could have been like, yo, why the fuck y'all making all this shit about race? Well, my grandmama couldn't vote till she was deep in her 30s, when she couldn't piss where she wanted to piss. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like yes, when there's this like this vision of sort of equality, here come the race police. Why is it always about race? I'm a good writer, fam. Like, I don't say that shit out loud, but race is one of the lenses I work through. And when I'm working through that lens, I want it to be strong. And in Mississippi, we have a lot of models who've done that kind of work, but they all do all kind of other different work. Can you just imagine a piece that was just about race? Race. It's an ignorant ass piece. Nobody's gonna read that shit. Like, there's other things that happen. But what I'm interested in, Kayleigh, is how do you all feel now that you've made that public statement, that you all have made a statement to the world? I know some people I've read some people say, well, that's what y'all were doing anyway, but you weren't doing that anyway. So what do you feel about that?
Yeah, well, just to go back to my first question, I hope you don't think that I was pigeonholing you into saying that you're like the race guy.
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
But yeah, I mean, to be honest, it was a big step and kind of a scary step for us to do that, because yes, people criticize Mississippi Today, or really news in general, and say that it's like leans to the left or whatever. But we really have not run opinion, and that has been a conscious decision. And kind of like I've mentioned, it just seems like now more than ever, if we just sit on this, and we're doing Mississippi a disservice. And so, I mean, our goal is not to get everyone on the same page, because I don't think that's ever going to happen. But we want to be having conversations, and it's kind of been a weird moment for journalism, because we're having to decide, like, is it someone else that did not like the decision we made mentioned that we were like stepping into activism, or being activists. And that's a weird thought, because I think journalism is becoming a lot more bold about like the way that we write about things. I mean, like an example would be, obviously a lot of the reason we're having a conversation about race right now is like Breonna Taylor and George Floyd were killed, and that spurred a lot of protest. And in the past, you might have seen a story that said George Floyd was died in police custody.
Right.
Now, I mean, it's a conscious decision as a news organization to say he was killed by police. Like, we're taking the passive action out of like him just dying while police were around, you know? And you could say that that's activism. I don't know. But it's kind of like us on journalists making this choice, like, are we going to do that or are we not? We also like recently made the choice to start capitalizing Black because, well, number one, it was a style decision that like is happening nationwide. But number one, like, we as a news org have come to recognize that like Black is a culture and an identity, and not just a skin color. And so that is why we're doing that. But I guess to answer your question, Kiese, it's been weird.
Right.
It just is, we're trying something new. And I think we knew from the beginning that by doing this that, you know, not everyone's going to agree, but I guess that's not the point. And that, I mean, I'm kind of going to ask the same version of what I asked you before, is what I'm wondering is like, the goal here is to have a conversation. We just want people to start talking about this stuff. But there are going to be people that are going to say, well, why are you making this a thing? Like, but the people that are making this a thing are not affected by what we're writing about.
Yeah, and like, we're just, you know, we're just people who went through schooling, right? Like, so whether we went to great schooling or not, when somebody says, I'm just a word person too, so when somebody's like, why are you making this a thing? Fam, things surround us. The question is, why does this thing irritate you, right? And in answering that question, someone is going to have to reveal like their political disposition. And more than political disposition, I think you're gonna have to reveal your moral disposition. And if you look at this country, and if you look at, more importantly, our state, and you see that disproportionately Black people, Black children are suffering, no matter what the metric is, more than any other group of people. And then you have the gall to say, why are we not making it about race? Why are we focusing on things that actually have something to do with Black people and Black children in this state suffering more? And you call yourself a Christian. Well, y'all can't say it, but I'm gonna say it. You're a fucking hypocrite, bruh. And stop calling yourself a fucking Christian or a Mississippian, because I grew up under both of those people. And my grandmother, who is a Black woman who was denied the right to vote until her 30th, until she was deep into her 30s, she cares so much about the Mexican folks who live right next door to her. You know what I'm saying? Who had their fucking like children and parents taken away from them. She hates the fact that they were brought in when she worked at the chicken plant, and not that they were brought in to take her place, but they were brought in and treated poorly. And she was guided to that by her a kind of Mississippi Christianity. I'm not at all purporting that everyone should be Christian. What I'm saying is her Mississippi Christianity leads her to believe, why aren't we making more of a things about the way the state invests in other people's suffering? And that's a Black woman saying that. So this whole notion of like, why is it a thing? Well, shit, things surround us. But there's some things that make it harder for the least of these and the most vulnerable people to thrive, to love, to breathe the way they need to. And if you are an entity of any kind and you don't care about that suffering, okay. But don't hide behind it and like, oh, why are we making it into a thing? Fuck that. Things around us, nouns are around us. Yeah. Some of these things hurt people. And I think we have the responsibility to alleviate that pain if those people didn't do anything to carry that burden. And a lot of times, I mean, especially if we're just talking about our Latinx, like neighbors, they didn't do shit but come here and try to fucking work. And we treat them, you know, I'm saying we collectively either aren't stepping in to help or watching them be absolutely maimed. I just think, like, if you call yourself a Christian, that's the work we're supposed to do. That's the problem with Mississippi. We want to be the most Christian state in the country, but then our actions want to actually be the most racist shit in the country. It doesn't align. You know what I mean? To me, it doesn't align.
Well, that actually is a great segue into the next thing I wanted to ask you about was the flag. I mean, obviously, everyone knows it's been a big year for that. We had a flag with a Confederate battle emblem that flew for 126 years. Maybe it was 127, don't quote me, but a long. And people tried before to make this change, and it didn't happen until June or July. And I'm wondering for you as a Mississippian, I know I've heard you speak about this, but I'm curious, what was it like to see that happen?
You know, it's complicated for me. I'm not even gonna lie to you because, I mean, most of my life, I was of two minds, right? Like, I didn't want to have anything to do with the Confederate part of that flag or that state. And so I would write things about it, how we need to not worry about the symbolism as much as we need to worry about the material condition. And then I moved back and I saw in much older Black people, I interviewed one of them for this Vanity Fair piece I wrote a few months ago, Miss Frankie, and she talked to me about what that flag coming down did to her in terms of like pleasure and joy. And I talked to my granny about it. And I talked to some older people who've been organizing to get a lot of things done on the structural level, but also just to get like that, like insult to injury taken down. And so when I found that those people, some of whom have been organizing for like 6 decades, were joyful, I just had to check myself and be like, we deserve joy too. Do you know? We also deserve structural equity. And I don't think a flag coming down is structural equity. But what a flag coming down does do to, I think, some older people that I've met is it literally says, like, for whatever reason, mostly have to do with people who fought. Like, you are not going to have to bear the injury to the insult of racial inequity in this state. So, you know, working with different people behind the scenes in different ways, I was happy when that thing came down. It was complicated, you know, it's complicated because I'm very good friends with Lauren. I was really good friends with Lauren Stennis as a young person. I really respect what she was trying to do. But in Mississippi, what we know is whenever there's like a victory, be it symbolic or literal, there's always backlash, and the backlash lands most profoundly in the chest of the most aggrieved and the most vulnerable. So my fear is that what we know is true is, like, you know, the flag comes down, I'm like, how are they going to find a way to punish the most vulnerable people in our state? Because they think that is a loss, you know? Or you can live in a place like Oxford where they're like, no, we're not even going to take down the fucking soldiers, the Confederate monuments. We're not even going to do it. But if they do, my concern is often who's going to bear the brunt of that backlash. And that's what I'm saying is complicated to me now, because like I came back to Mississippi different than when I left. When I left, I had a big imagination. I had all the heart in the world, but I didn't have any money. I didn't have any sort of accolade. I didn't have anything to protect myself other than my fist and, like, you know, weapons. I don't believe in weapons anymore, but I have more things to fight. But I'm not gonna feel the brunt of that repercussion as much as other people. So I don't know. I get kind of torn. The shit needed to be down. It needed to never have been up there. But I'm more concerned with, like, how people are gonna treat the least, the people with the least. You know, if all of these monuments come down, if Trump loses, like, what is the backlash? In our state, we learned that we know the backlash is violent and sometimes unrelenting. You know.
Mm-hmm. Well, on a more optimistic note of that, I guess the thing I was most surprised about with the flag was that I mentioned George Floyd a moment ago, but like we had a giant protest in Jackson, which was like our biggest protest since the civil rights movement, I want to say. And it was organized by teenagers, by young people. Yeah. And one of their rallying cries at this protest was like to remove that flag. And I know that, like you said, a lot of people have been putting in a lot of work on this for a long time, but that seemed kind of amazing that some young Mississippians could organize and rally, and people listened. Like the people
Yes.
in the Capitol, who are mostly older white guys, seemed to listen.
I mean, so I'm a very corny person, right? Like, and that's why I revise so much, because my first drafts are very corny. But seeing these young people do what a lot of us young Mississippians who were once young people wanted and tried to do, and see them successfully do it, I mean, like, there's nothing that feels better in the world. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, seeing those people, because what I think most people listening to this understand is, like, when you do something like that, you know, the march is the culmination of lots and lots and lots and lots of hard, tough, organizing conversations, lots of feelings being hurt, lots of people being affirmed. So what we see and what we saw in Jackson was, like, I think it was literally, I would argue, centuries in the making, definitely decades in the making, but it doesn't just happen, fam. And so I need to make sure in my mind, because I just believe in young people so much, and sometimes I think I can, like, make them an amorphous, like, blob. Like, they're just righteous young people. You know what I'm saying? Like, I need to be able to be like, yo, they righteous young people, but sometimes they make mistakes. I'm not to that point yet with those folks, because they've done what so many of us and our great grandparents who also fought. Like, that's the thing about our state. There's a history of young people fighting. Like, in somewhere, like, they're stepping into that and they're remixing it. And I know a lot of people my age are like, yeah, but they're not doing it and respecting the elders. I think they are respecting the elders the way that elders most wanted to be respected. Like, they're channeling that shit. They may not be using the same rhetoric, thank God, but I got nothing but love and joy. And, if any way I can be of use in terms of anything, resource, conversation, talking. But one thing I do when I do talk to young people is I'm not trying to tell them what to do. I'm trying to ask them how I can be of help. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, I think that's how you fuck up you fuck up relationships with young people, when you come up in there acting like you've been here, done this. Here's what you need to do now. I'm asking y'all, what do you need? If I can help you do that, I'm gonna help. If you want to ask my advice, I'll give you that. But I'm not about to come in there and start talking all down to people who actually have been more effective than I was as a young person, or the generation, real talk, who came right before me. So that's how I feel.
And guys, if you have any questions, make sure to put them in the chat box. I still have like a few more questions myself, but I'm wondering if the joy that you feel from young people and the hope of the future, does that at all temper the concern that you have about what you mentioned a moment ago about what the backlash might be for all the change we've seen? But, like, I don't know if...
Yeah, fam. I mean, whenever I do public conversations, I have to decide, like, how honest I want to be. I mean, those young people are ready, and those young people are in trouble. Like, we can say it any other way we want to say it, and there's a lot of ways that these people go about getting you. They go about getting you by buying you. They go about getting you by, like, dissuading you from getting some shit you deserve. They go about getting you by giving you some shit you do deserve, and then, like, terrorizing you in that position. They go about, they infiltrate. Like, these are not, like, scientific type things. Like, this is what happens in movement work across the globe, and especially in Mississippi. So, when young folks in our state do things that appear to rupture the raggedy, violent status quo, we cannot be Pollyannish enough to believe they are not going to reap, like, a severe penalty for it. The question is, are we going to be there to help, to love, and to help maintain when that happens? And I hope the answer is yes, but we can't be fools. Like, those young people, one, mental health wise, we have to be hopefully asking, are they okay? It takes a lot to go up against a state. It takes a lot to go up against a nation state that double teams all the time, and always claims like the ethical when they're completely unethical. That shit can fuck up your brain. It can fuck up your head. I'm not saying that that's what's happening with the young kids now, but most young people, when you do this kind of work, like, your friendships get bent, your mind gets kind of messy. You think about harming yourself in ways the state tells you ain't shit in so many ways. A lot of people who do this work don't come from money. They don't get to fall onto, like, fucking, like, soft pillows. They fall on, like, jagged ground. and they fight anyway. But we need to be there to realize there is a backlash. People will suffer. And the question is, how can we be of help to those people as they fight and as they try to mend wounds? That's not hyperbolic. That's just like freedom work in the United States, you know?
Absolutely. We do have one question I'm going to read to you from Susan Cushman. She said, I'm a native of Jackson, and I was at Ole Miss 50 years ago when the protests happened at Fulton Chapel in February of 1970. I'm writing a novel about a Black man and a white woman who fell in love at Ole Miss in 1966. I'm a white woman. I just read your essay, and I love this line, quote, I hope we continue the courageous work of unlocking Mississippi's abundance today. Can you talk more about unlocking Mississippi's abundance?
Yeah, I mean, so the thing about us is so amazing is that, you know, I wrote a piece about LeBron James. I wrote it a few days ago, but then they released it the day he won. And one of the things I'm amazed at about LeBron James is that, you know, all of you know, this as a college athlete, right? Like all of the stuff that goes into performing, and immediately after the game, win or loss, that dude is in front, has someone with a microphone, not just talking about the play you made, but can you talk to us about redlining? Can you talk to us about voter suppression when you tired as fuck, right?
Yeah.
One of the reasons that I love that so much is because one of the primary unlockers of this nation's like most, I think, carnivorous locks was Fannie Lou Hamer, right? Who was like so directed in her sincerity. So she was, when she says, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, one thing we know about Fannie Lou Hamer is that she was tired. And she confronted that tiredness and she went on. And so, you know, after she's beaten damn near to death, she's telling the world about it. You know, ask any writer in this country to write a cogent essay about getting their fucking head and eye and kidneys punctured 2 days or 3 days after it happened. It's not gonna happen. Most people need years to do that. And so what I'm saying is we're choosing wrong. We need to choose the best unlockers of Mississippi. Fannie Lou Hamer is one of them. I.W. Wells is one of them. Medgar Evers is one of them. Margaret Walker is one of them. I think Mississippi Today is one of them. But when we choose wrong, when we choose people who actually want to lock this island of inequity and make it like tighter and lock more people out, we need to be honest. We don't need to call that shit like anything else than what it is, which is a doubling down on suffering and death. Because we have the model. That's the thing about us. The other places I've lived in the country don't. Like, we have recent models of people loving this nation, loving the possibility of what we could do in spite of what Mississippi did to them. Fannie Lou Hamer is just like the most, for me, the most wonderful, sweaty, hardcore example of what an unlocking of Mississippi could be. Any town in this state, if any town in this state was worth their anything, and they have the opportunity to put up a statue of Fannie Lou Hamer, which means little young kids are going to become middle school kids who are going to become high school kids who are going to look at this fucking like woman every day and then have to ask themselves, damn, why is she there? Why is she there? Then we answer that question. Like, we have the choices. We have wonderful revelatory choices in front of us. A lot of times we just don't make those choices. You know what I'm trying to say? And that's what I was also trying to say in that piece. I think, like, I am supporting Mike Espy wholeheartedly, but I also want to be honest as a writer. Like, Espy and I don't align politically, right? We're not aligned politically, and that's okay. You know, when we've had conversations about that lack of alignment. And best believe it, when he wins, I'm going to be pushing Espy to do some things that he might not want to do. But he, in my mind, he has not disqualified himself from running for being a rep of Mississippi, especially, and this is not mine to tell, but if you look at Mike Espy's history and you look at the role Mike Espy's family had in lots of shit that happened in this state, including what happened to Emmett Till's body, including conversations with Mamie Till, like, there's a history there. Like, Espy in some way is the history that all of these people wanted us to be. Now, I would like to push him a little bit more to what people call left, but I'm not finna go bang him on the head right now about all of that. We're gonna try to get this work done, and then he's gonna have to hear from me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that is a good segue into the question we have from an audience member about what motivates you, what keeps you going even when the world is so heavy, and how do you push yourself?
I just wrote an essay about this for Vanity Fair, but like, okay, I'm saying things I've never said out loud, so they're not gonna make too much sense, but I mean, I think the world as I knew it before March 11th is gone, right? Like, and there's a lot to despair in like Baldwin and Bessie Smith always talk. There's a lot to despair in, like, you know, the desecration or like the movement of home. A lot to despair, and I can talk about despair in a lot of ways. But there's also, and I think you have to be careful when you talk about this in terms of race and class, but there's also like new pathways to pleasure. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I never was a beard picker, like a nerve. You know, some people pull their hair out and shit when they're nervous, and but that's what I am now, fam. Like, and so you ask me one of the things that brings me pleasure. Like, I sit in my house and I think and I look outside and I pull all the hair out of my fucking beard, and I'm like, wow, I've got more hair on my beard. And then I look at my shit and it's all patched up, and I'm like, oh well, can't go nowhere. Who give a fuck? You know what I'm trying to say? Like, it's just, to me, I'm using that as an example of saying, like, I think we have to find new things to bring us pleasure, and responsible pleasure is different than pleasure. And so, you know, I'm still doing my reading, I'm still doing my writing, but I'm trying, you know, I'm trying to change up my process. I'm trying to be a much more honest, loving person. I'm also trying to do that thing that Mississippi is like, you know, we have a lot of home training. You know, we're very understated. Even the fucked up racist people in our state will do for you if they see you on the side of the road sometimes. But I'm also trying to do that thing where I talk a lot about the things that I might be decent at, you know, like not trying to bump my chest at all, but just trying to be like, man, you don't need to wake up and act like you didn't create some dope art. Like, you need to sit for like 10 minutes in the fact that you did something you didn't think you could do. You need to thank whatever your God is for that. And now you need to get up and try to stretch and laugh and see. So I'm like everybody else right now, trying to find new ways in the pleasure. I think where I fail is sometimes trying to hold on to the old when the world has shifted. You know, I mean, I wanna value the old and what it did and how it helped, but I also just want people. I want pleasure to not be a word that feels pornographic, and I want pleasure to be something that we think of that like brings us joy. And how do we responsibly feel pleasure in this new world is the question I'm trying to work through.
Right. Thank you for answering that.
Of course, thank you.
We have another question that says, Kiese, as educators, we have seen that public education is under attack with political movements like the Patriotic Education Act that tries to ban schools from teaching about institutional racism and the actual history of our country. What is your best advice for educators working with young people trying to address the realities of the persistence of institutional racism, particularly within the context of the Deep South?
Yeah, that's tough in Mississippi, right? Where you can't strike. You can't, you know, union as teachers, you strike, you give up your pensions. It'd be interesting if we did that for police officers. It'd be real interesting if the Officers' Bill of Rights, if we said that, you know, if you kill someone who couldn't kill you, you lose your pension. But I'm just gonna say, one thing I didn't expect when I came back to Mississippi was like all of these young teachers who, and I'm not trying to make like they're all committed and they're all like doing incredible jobs, but in my experience, like, yo, these young teachers are different than the ones I had, fam. Like, they are out here using that shadow network to get, I mean, I can't tell you how many books of long division or how to slowly or heavy that I've sent in mass to teachers who got them in the back door in their classrooms. And that's just my books, you know. They do the same thing with Jacqueline Woodson. They do the same thing with Derek Barnes, and they definitely do the same thing with Jason Reynolds' books, you know. And so I think one way we have to do, sadly, is we have to use a shadow network. We have to get those things in the back door. But the problem is, Mississippi, is you do stuff like that, you can be suspended, or you can be, and so you can't really organize around it the way you can in other places. But I just want to continue to just be of help any way I can to young teachers. But I also just think, and this is where I sound like an old Black person, like a lot of these school boards, a lot of, you know, be it IHL, you know, who runs Mississippi schooling, or locally, like that shit is voted on sometimes. So you gotta like get out there, you gotta not just vote for the people, but you gotta kind of like help create the candidates you want to see on these boards who will understand the expansiveness of Mississippi's history. That's what's so ill to me. The expansiveness of our history demands like that the books and the shit be expansive and stretchy too, right? Like I didn't learn anything about Mississippi history. I remember, literally having a teacher tell me that the Civil War was a war of northern aggression. And here I go, up to Oberlin, I'm starting talking about the war of northern aggression. And I'm I'm groups of people and I'm trying to be cool and shit. And they like, bro, that wasn't no war. When that happened? And I was like, the war of northern aggression, motherfucker, and they were like, oh, the Civil War? And I'm just like, wait a minute now, is that the same thing? You know what I'm saying? And I'm me. You know what I'm saying? Like I read a lot. I don't know how they got past me. So all that to say, I hope that the teachers continue to use the backdoor channels, but I also hope we do a lot to cultivate like school boards and whatnot. And more importantly, we got to figure out a way to teach these teachers, like to teach the teachers. The teachers need much more teaching, and they need to be paid at least twice as much as they're being paid if we care about our children. I don't think that as a state we do care about our children. So the right thing would be like is to say we don't give a fuck about our children. That's why we're not paying these teachers anything. That's why we're not like doubling down on like, innovative education. Mississippi, like the rest of the country, doesn't like telling the truth. So I just want to encourage them to keep on using those backdoor channels because that shit works. It helps, it works, but it's also a risk for the teacher, sadly.
Mm-hmm. You described yourself as an old Black person a second ago, so this is great for this question. Are there reasons for young Black people to stay and invest in Mississippi?
Wow. Yes, but I think investment, I would just ask young people to consider like all of the different ways you can invest in Mississippi. Do like I think about what you do and how you have undeniably made Mississippi better, right? Mississippi was not your home. You came here, you stayed here, you're working with and for an organization of people who are like trying to unlock Mississippi. That's one way to invest. Some people, it might mean leaving, but I would say if you leave, y'all, like, please don't leave, remember where you came from, bring Mississippi with you in every door. If you make a little few dollars, try to find out the organizations that need that stuff the most. I just think that there's ways that you can commit to your state that don't entail the traditional way. Though the traditional way is still, I think, a very sort of strong way, which is to live, work with people organically in your state and try to build. But I also just want to encourage people, if you can get out and keep your love, and actually, if you can get out as a means of finding ways to love Mississippi, which is what a lot of people have to do that too. But please never stop loving that place just because the world has told us that the worst of Mississippi is Mississippi. All of us know that shit is not true. And I just think we can do everything we can in our lives, whether we're in Mississippi, live in Canada, live across the globe, but if Mississippi's in our heart bump in some way, we just have to encourage it to value the people who made it the best that it can be and not the opposite, which is what a lot of times we do.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask one more question. What time is it? We have time for one more question.
Okay.
What do you think is the role of the American artist or writer today? Baldwin said that an artist is a witness and must vomit up the truth, and certainly he's right. But where does beauty fit in? How do we balance witnessing the hell of the moment and the past and the hard work ahead with beauty and gratitude now?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about that question is that, that is it's a question, but that is the goal, do you know? So I'm saying that, like, if you read a piece or you see a piece of artwork that is in some way focused on, let's say, history of lynching or public hangings or poverty, we can't just automatically assume that there's no beauty in that piece. I think the weight of that piece and the lastingness of that piece is going to be contingent on how beautifully it is crafted. Do you know what I'm trying to say? And so we know we live in an absolutely beautiful state. One of the things that makes it so terrifying is that the beauty is not forsaken. The beauty is sought out and destroyed. And so I can tell you that, and I can write that, and I can write that in the way I just said it, or I can write that with as much tenderness and texture and beauty as need be. But when I write that beautifully, I'm gonna need readers to be like, that was some beautiful ass shit. Not just be like, oh, it's so fucked up that he's writing about lynching and horror and terror, right? You know what I mean? And this is what I learned from the Black writers who came before me from, Wright, even though people talk about Wright as like this, like brutal realist writer. Like, look at Wright's entire like what I would call like discography. Like, the dude was writing beautifully. He just goes through different phases. Margaret Walker, same thing. Faulkner, same thing. Eudora Welty, same thing. Like, the beauty is always there. There's a beauty in this conversation right now, even though we're talking about hard things. So while a lot of that question has to do with the writer, a lot of that question has to do with the watcher and the reader. Can you find beauty in the rendering of some horrific shit? I hope you can if it's there. I thought there was a lot of beauty in that piece y'all asked me to write. I'm not trying to be like I'm such a beautiful writer. I'm not trying to be like I'm beautiful. But I'm trying to say, like, for me to make that pivot into Eddie, like Glaude, who is a Mississippian from Moss Point, who left, who's on TV every day, bringing the best of Mississippi with him. To me, that pivot into Eddie Glaude and out of Eddie Glaude, which also a pivot into that photograph, which was in Alabama. To me, that was beautiful. Now I'm talking about something that's not beautiful. I'm actually ending on an image of me and fucking Mike Espy being publicly hanged. That is not beautiful. But the words that we said in that shit, which is like, Mississippi is the key. We do not have to be this way. That is beautiful. I think it's beautiful. You know what I'm saying? So I got a little too excited in this interview today, but I appreciate it.
No, that's great. And that kind of goes back to what we were talking about, I think, is that like, you can read the piece that you wrote and it is jarring. And even, I was reading and like you said, you discuss yourself hanging and it's hard to read, but I guess the point is to like walk away from that and not be like, I did not like that, and not think about it any further. It's like, it's supposed to get our juices flowing and kind of make us think about why we are reacting the way that we did.
Yes.
That is my 2 cents, but.
And then we live in a state where, at least right now, like you, Mike Espy, me, are not hanging from trees for trying to change this nation. Like, that happened partially because of the work of these young people, but it also happened because of like these older people who have died, who were once young people fighting. Like, to me, it is beauty that I can write that piece, that we can have this conversation, that Mike can be out there doing that. And it's a risk. We know, but we ain't hanging from trees right now. And that's not just because like the worst white people decided to get good at love. Right? It's partially because of like organized, directed action across this state and across this globe. And if that's not beautiful, I don't know what the fuck is. Like, it's beautiful that we can talk about that and not be strung up from a tree, but it didn't just happen. It happened because of what is guiding these young people, which has always guided young people in our state. And so anyway, I thank you for risking what you risk all the time to do what you do for us. And I thank you for this opportunity to talk too.
Well, I thank you. This has been incredible, and I could honestly keep it going for a lot longer, but we did bill it as an hour, and I think I'm going to put it to a close. So Kiese, thank you so much for being honest and having a wonderful conversation. And for anyone who wants to ask any more questions, I want to say, Kiese, he's on Twitter. I'm not going to ask you guys to, if you want to give your email, that's fine. But we are also available on our website at MississippiToday.org. You can read what Kiese's written on our website under essays. And we are going to have another event like this, I believe next week, with Ralph Eubanks and Adam Ganeshow. So thank you everyone for coming. And I don't know if Mary Margaret is still here, but I know she had a few words she wanted to add as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll hop in and say another thank you to you, Kiese. That was really powerful. I'd love to just like read a couple of the comments that readers have said. David says, yes, I was taught the same thing about the Civil War in Memphis. So you're creating a lot of connectivity, a lot of, just thank yous for your honesty, for your truth telling. And I say that too, from my seat over here. I know that after you published your essay, the front row with us, I think you put on Twitter that you didn't move back to Mississippi to be comfortable. And none of us in journalism get into this work to be comfortable. And I appreciate you taking this big step with us. And I appreciate you, our readers, go in there with us too. We've had some great questions today. And As Kayleigh said, the conversation continues. We'll be back next Tuesday with Ralph Eubanks, another great Mississippi writer. He'll be publishing an essay with us within the next week, so do stay tuned for that. And for those of you who joined us today because you are fans of Kiese Laymon and maybe you don't know a lot about Mississippi Today, I encourage you to go to MississippiToday.org and sign up for our newsletter. It's the best way to keep up with the headlines and what's happening in the newsroom. And we also have a new program that's really grown out of a sort of a larger strategy around this work about a bigger conversation on race in Mississippi. It's called the Community Ambassadors Program, and we're wanting to build relationships with people around the state, not your typical helicopter in, parachute in reporter relationship. This isn't transactional. We want to build real friendships and conversations with local folks and know about what's going on in your community. So when there is an opportunity to report and to meet your information needs, we've got some real relationships in place. And that's just one way that we're thinking about reaching all Mississippians. We want our readership to reflect the demographic of our state, just like our newsroom. And it can only happen with help from you guys. So again, thanks for being here today. Thank you, Kiese. Thank you, Kayleigh. Great interview. And hope to see many of you again next week.